The dinner rush had just begun, and the soft hum of chatter filled the grand dining hall. The restaurant glittered with golden light from chandeliers, bouncing off the polished marble floors. Waiters moved quickly between tables, balancing trays of food and glasses filled to the brim. Among them was a young waitress who had been working there for almost a year. Her steps were light but hurried, and though her face carried a calm smile, her eyes told a different story, one of exhaustion and quiet dreams she rarely spoke about. She had always loved this job, even if it wasn't easy. The restaurant was one of the most expensive in the city, the kind of place where people came to show off their money more than to enjoy their meals. The guests often spoke loudly about business, luxury cars, and faraway vacations. She listened politely, nodding when spoken to, though she had never experienced any of those things. What kept her going was her mother's voice on the phone each morning, reminding her that every small effort mattered. Her job helped pay for her younger brother's school fees, and that was reason enough to keep pushing through the long hours. Every evening, as she walked past the corner of the restaurant, her eyes always stopped at one thing, the grand piano. It stood silently, covered with a velvet cloth, its keys untouched except on weekends when a hired musician came to play soft tunes for the guests. The sound of the piano had always been special to her. It reminded her of her father. He had been a simple man, a mechanic who came home every day smelling of oil and dust. But when he sat by their small upright piano in the old apartment, everything about him changed. His fingers were rough, but the music that came from them was tender, almost magical. As a child, she would sit beside him, pressing random keys while he smiled and guided her hands. Music is like speaking without words, he used to say. You don't need to explain what you feel. You just play. Those words had stayed in her heart long after he was gone. His death had come too suddenly, leaving her family with debts and heartbreak. The piano was sold to cover hospital bills. Since then, she hadn't touched one again. Still, every night when she wiped the tables and passed by that silent piano, she felt something stir inside her, a quiet ache she didn't know how to silence. That evening was no different. She was busy taking orders and serving guests who barely looked at her. A group of wealthy businessmen sat near the center, their laughter loud and careless. One of them waved his hand impatiently and she hurried over. You took long enough, he said, not even meeting her eyes. She apologized softly, keeping her tone calm. She had learned not to take rude behavior personally. It was just part of the job. But tonight, something was different. The restaurant manager had announced earlier that a very important guest would be coming, a billionaire known for his huge investments and unpredictable moods. Everyone was nervous. The staff was told to be on their best behavior. The kitchen was spotless, the tablecloths freshly ironed, and even the candles were replaced with taller ones. When the billionaire finally arrived, the entire room seemed to shift. People whispered quietly, some even straightened their clothes. He walked in with a small group of guests, dressed in an expensive suit, his expression calm but cold. He had that air of authority that made people careful with their words. The waitress was told to serve their table personally. She felt her hands grow a little shaky, but she nodded and went about her work. As she served the appetizers, she could feel their eyes on her. They talked and laughed among themselves, occasionally glancing her way as if she were part of the evening's entertainment. One of the women at the table made a passing comment about how quiet the place felt without music. The billionaire turned his head toward the piano and smirked. "There's a piano right there," he said, his tone light but with a trace of arrogance. "Why don't we get some music?" The manager quickly explained that the pianist only came on weekends. The billionaire raised an eyebrow. "That's disappointing," he said. His gaze then shifted toward the waitress who had just returned with a tray of drinks. "You there," he said, his voice sharp but amused. "You look like you could use a little fun. Why don't you play something for us?" For a moment she froze. She wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. The guests chuckled, thinking it was a joke. Her heart began to pound in her chest. "Sir, I don't play anymore," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. But the billionaire wasn't really listening. "Come on," he said with a smirk. "It's just a piano. You can't possibly make it sound worse than silence." The people around him laughed again. Her face burned with embarrassment. She looked toward the manager, hoping he'd step in, but he only gave her a nervous glance. She could tell he didn't want to upset the guests. Refusing could easily cost her job. She swallowed hard, unsure of what to do. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, clearly amused by her hesitation. "Go on," he said. "Show us what you've got." His tone was teasing, but everyone could sense the pressure behind it. She stood there for a few seconds, staring at the piano, her hands trembling slightly. Every instinct in her told her to walk away, but another voice whispered in her heart, a softer one that sounded almost like her father's. Before she could change her mind, she nodded quietly and walked toward the piano. The restaurant fell silent. Even the waiter stopped moving for a moment. She pulled the velvet cover off and sat down on the bench. The piano looked massive up close, its surface smooth and shining under the soft lights. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished wood. She took a deep breath. Her palms felt cold and damp. She hadn't played in years. What if she couldn't remember? What if she made a fool of herself in front of everyone? Her mind was spinning with fear and doubt. But then, as she rested her fingers lightly on the keys, something inside her shifted. Memories came flooding back. Her father's laughter, the sound of their tiny apartment filled with music, the warmth of those simple nights. Her breath steadied. She pressed the first key, just one. The note rang softly, pure and fragile. The sound filled the quiet air like a whisper. A few people at the tables leaned forward. She pressed another key, then another, letting her hands find their rhythm slowly. The melody began to take shape, small and hesitant, but real. She closed her eyes, shutting out the crowd. It was just her and the piano now. Each note carried a piece of her heart. She didn't play to impress anyone. She played because she had to, because music was the only way she knew how to speak when words failed her. The melody was something she used to play with her father, a tune they'd made up together. It was simple but full of emotion, like a quiet conversation between two souls. The restaurant stayed silent. The laughter was gone. Even the billionaire who had started this as a joke now sat still, his smirk fading slowly. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the room, soft at first, then growing stronger as her confidence returned. The young waitress forgot about the stares, the job, and the pressure. She poured everything she felt into that music, the sadness, the longing, the dreams she had buried. The melody rose and fell like waves, gentle but powerful. When she finally lifted her fingers off the keys, the last note hung in the air for a long, fragile moment, before fading away. The silence that followed was heavy and deep. Then someone clapped softly. Another joined. And before she could even process what had happened, the entire restaurant was applauding. It wasn't loud or forced, and it was real. She sat there, her hands still trembling, tears welling in her eyes. She hadn't expected any of this. She had only wanted to get through the moment without embarrassing herself. The billionaire's expression had changed completely. He didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he simply nodded once, almost respectfully. The waitress stood up slowly, her knees weak but her heart strangely light. She had come into work just hoping to make it through another long shift. She never thought a night that began with humiliation would end with something so beautiful. As she covered the piano again and walked back toward the kitchen, she couldn't help but smile, a small, quiet smile that came from deep inside. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. After that night, the young waitress couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She had gone home still in her uniform, too tired to change, but her heart was full of feelings she couldn't explain. The sound of applause still echoed in her ears. For a long time, she just sat by the small window in her tiny apartment, staring at the city lights, wondering if it had really happened. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop since someone had recorded her playing and uploaded it online. The video had spread faster than she could imagine. People were commenting things like, "This is real talent," and "How could someone so gifted be working as a waitress?" She didn't know how to respond. Part of her was happy, deeply happy, but another part of her felt shy and unsure. She had never been someone who liked attention. The next morning, she walked into work, not expecting much. She assumed everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. The moment she entered the restaurant, her co-workers looked at her differently. Some smiled, some whispered, and others patted her shoulder as she passed. Even her manager, who was usually strict and cold, gave her a nod that almost looked like pride. "You've become quite the celebrity," one of the waiters said jokingly as he passed by. She laughed awkwardly, brushing it off. "I just played a song," she said softly. That's all. But deep down she knew it wasn't just a song. It was the part of her that she had buried. The part she thought she'd lost when life became about survival instead of dreams. For years she had ignored that voice inside her that longed for a piano, for music, for something more than just paying bills. And somehow, one unexpected night, that part of her had come alive again. Later that evening, when the dinner rush began, she was asked to serve at the same table where the billionaire had sat the night before. He had reserved it again. The news made her nervous. She didn't know if he wanted to see her, or if it was just coincidence. Either way, her hands trembled slightly as she carried the trays. When he arrived, the restaurant once again seemed to shift. People glanced over, curious. But this time, the atmosphere around him felt different. He wasn't laughing loudly or showing off. His expression was calm, thoughtful even. He greeted the staff politely, something no one expected. When the waitress approached to take his order, he looked up at her and said, "I saw the video." Her heart skipped. She nodded, unsure what to say. "You surprised me," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd actually play that night." She smiled faintly, keeping her tone humble. "I didn't plan to, sir. I just didn't want to cause trouble." He studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand her. "Trouble?" he repeated. "You call that performance trouble? You moved an entire room to silence. That's not something people forget." She didn't know how to respond, so she simply thanked him and continued her work. But his words stayed with her. For the rest of the evening, every time she walked by his table, she could feel his eyes following her. Not in a judging way, more like curiosity, maybe even respect. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, he asked to speak with her. The manager, sensing it was something important, gave her a quick nod. She approached the table slowly, unsure what to expect. "I want to ask you something," the billionaire said, leaning slightly forward. "How long have you been playing the piano?" She hesitated. "Since I was a child," she replied softly. "My father taught me, but I stopped after he passed away." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You shouldn't have stopped," he said. "There's something in your playing. It's real. You don't see that often." The compliment made her blush. She wasn't used to praise, especially not from someone like him. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. He sat back, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. "You know," he said, "I've been to concerts all over the world. I've heard professionals who can play perfectly. But what you did, it wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling. You made people feel something." She lowered her eyes, unsure what to say. It felt strange hearing that from a man like him, someone who probably had everything, talking about feelings like he understood hers. He continued after a pause. "Would you consider playing again?" "Not here. At an event I'm hosting next month. It's a charity dinner. I want genuine music, not just background noise. I think you'd be perfect." The words hit her like a wave. For a moment she didn't know if he was serious. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yes, you," he said. "Of course you'll be paid. And you'll have a chance to perform in front of people who can open doors for you. Think about it." She didn't know what to say. Her heart raced with both excitement and fear. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," she admitted. He gave a small smile. "You weren't ready the other night either," he said, "and look what happened." Those words stayed with her long after he left. She went home that night, unable to sleep. The thought of playing in front of a crowd like that terrified her. But there was another part of her, the same brave part that sat at that piano the first time, that whispered, "Maybe this is your chance." The next few days passed in a blur. The video continued to spread, and people started recognizing her when she brought food to their tables. Some even asked for pictures. She wasn't used to attention, and though it embarrassed her, she was grateful. For the first time, she felt seen, not just as a waitress, but as someone with a story, with something beautiful to give. One evening after her shift, she stayed behind in the restaurant. The lights were dim, the tables empty. She pulled the cover off the piano again and sat down. Her fingers touched the keys gently, and she played the same melody from that night. It felt different now, lighter, freer. As the sound filled the quiet space, she imagined her father sitting beside her, smiling the way he used to. The billionaire's offer kept circling in her mind. It wasn't just about playing at an event. It was about believing in herself again. For so long, life had been about getting by, working, earning, surviving. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten what it meant to dream. A few days later, she made her decision. When the billionaire returned to the restaurant for another dinner, she approached him, nervous but determined. "Sir," she said softly, "about your offer." He looked up, waiting. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll play at your event." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face. "Good," he said. "I'll have my assistant reach out to arrange everything." As she turned to walk away, he added, "You made the right choice. Don't waste what you've been given." From that day, everything began to change. She spent her free hours practicing at the restaurant after closing. The staff, who once teased her for being quiet, now gathered around to listen. They cheered her on, offering support in small ways. A cup of tea, a word of encouragement, a smile. The manager even adjusted her schedule so she could have more time to prepare. The night of the event drew closer, and with each passing day, her nerves grew. But so did her excitement. It wasn't about impressing rich people anymore. It was about standing up for the part of herself she had almost lost. The piano was no longer just an instrument, it was her voice, her heart. Sometimes when she played late into the night, she thought about how strange life could be. One cruel joke, one embarrassing moment, and yet it had led her back to music. It had led her back to herself. She didn't know what would happen at the charity event or whether people would truly appreciate her. But she knew one thing: she would play with everything she had. Just like that night in the restaurant, because now she understood something her father used to say, that real music doesn't come from knowing all the right notes. It comes from living, from hurting, from hoping, and that, she realized, was something no amount of money or status could ever buy. The days leading up to the event felt like a dream. The waitress couldn't believe how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. One night she had been taking orders and cleaning tables, and now she was preparing to perform at a charity dinner hosted by one of the most powerful men in the country. It didn't feel real. Every evening after her shift, she stayed behind in the restaurant playing the piano for hours. Her fingers, once stiff and slow, had started to remember the smooth rhythm of her childhood. The music came more naturally now. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine the crowd she'd soon play for. People in suits and gowns, sitting at glittering tables waiting to hear her. The thought terrified her, but it also made her heart race with excitement. Her co-workers became her biggest supporters. They often stayed after work to listen to her practice. The kitchen staff clapped after every song, even if she made mistakes. The manager would stand at the back, pretending to check his phone, but she could see the small smile on his face. Their encouragement helped her believe she could really do it. A few days before the event, the billionaire's assistant came to the restaurant to go over the details. The performance would be held in a grand hall at one of the city's luxury hotels. It would be attended by business leaders, celebrities, and philanthropists from all over the world. The assistant spoke politely but clearly. Everything had to be perfect. The billionaire wanted her to play one main piece, something emotional that could touch the audience. When she heard that, she thought for a long time. She didn't want to play something famous or fancy. She wanted to play something real, something that came from her heart. So she decided to perform a piece she had written herself. It was unfinished, something she had started years ago with her father before life became too heavy. She spent nights working on it again, filling in the missing parts with everything she had felt since then, the struggles, the quiet hopes, the loneliness, and the small moments of joy. The night of the event arrived faster than she expected. She could barely eat all day. Her hands trembled as she got ready in her small apartment. The restaurant staff had helped her choose a simple but elegant dress, one that made her look graceful without being flashy. When she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. For a moment, she didn't see a waitress. She saw someone strong, someone ready to be heard. At the hotel, everything sparkled. The chandeliers looked like floating stars, and the air was filled with the soft hum of conversation and laughter. Waiters in black suits moved around serving drinks and appetizers. The billionaire greeted guests at the entrance, smiling and shaking hands. When he saw her, he nodded warmly. "You look ready," he said. She smiled nervously. "I hope so. You'll be fine," he said. "Just play like no one's watching." His words calmed her a little. She followed one of the event staff members to the stage where the grand piano stood. It was larger than the one at the restaurant, its surface shining under the soft golden lights. The sight of it made her heart beat faster. When the speeches ended and the host announced her name, the room grew quiet. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she walked. For a moment, she could feel every pair of eyes in the room following her. Her hands felt cold, her heart pounding so loud it almost drowned out her thoughts. She sat down on the bench, straightened her back, and took another breath. She looked out at the crowd, rows and rows of faces she didn't know. But somewhere among them she caught sight of the billionaire watching her with a calm, encouraging expression. That was enough. Then she looked down at the keys. The room fell completely silent. The first note came out soft and fragile, like a whisper. It was almost lost in the silence, but then came another and another. Slowly, the melody began to grow. The tune was gentle but filled with emotion, the kind of music that speaks without words. She played the way her father used to tell her, not for perfection but for feeling. Every note carried a piece of her story, the long nights she spent working, the pain of loss, the strength she found in herself, and the small moments of beauty that kept her going. As the song unfolded, the audience leaned in. Some closed their eyes, others watched her hands move gracefully across the keys. The melody rose and fell like waves, soft at first, then powerful. It was raw and real, something that didn't need fancy technique or showmanship. It was pure emotion. Halfway through the piece, she felt her eyes sting with tears. She remembered her father's hands guiding hers when she was little, showing her where to place her fingers. She remembered how he would smile and say, "Music doesn't come from your hand, it comes from your heart." Her fingers moved faster now, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The sound filled the hall, reaching every corner. It was no longer just a song. It was her story being told out loud. By the time she reached the final part of the piece, the room was completely still. Even the waiters had stopped moving. The last note lingered in the air, delicate and trembling before fading into silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then one person began to clap. Another joined, and suddenly the entire hall erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was the kind of applause that comes from being deeply moved. Some people stood, others wiped their eyes. The sound filled the room like thunder. She sat there overwhelmed. Her hands were still shaking, but she couldn't stop smiling. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they were tears of relief, of joy, of finally being seen for who she was. The billionaire stood and clapped too, his eyes shining with pride. When the applause finally slowed, he walked onto the stage and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You just gave everyone something they'll never forget," he said softly. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was whisper, "Thank you." After the performance, people came up to her to offer congratulations. Some asked about her music, others wanted to know her story. Reporters took pictures and asked questions, but she stayed humble, answering softly, smiling shyly. The attention was overwhelming, but also heartwarming. Later, when most of the guests had left, she stood alone on the stage, looking at the piano. The hall was quiet again. She ran her fingers gently across the keys, whispering a small thank you to her father, to the universe, and to herself for not giving up. The billionaire approached her again. "You know," he said, "when I asked you to play at the restaurant that night, it was just a joke. But I'm glad you said yes. You reminded me that real talent doesn't wear a suit or come with fame. It just exists." She smiled, her voice soft but steady. "Sometimes all people need is a chance." He nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to help you. If you're serious about pursuing music again, I'll sponsor your studies. You shouldn't waste this gift." She froze for a moment, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Completely," he said. "You've earned it." The words hit her heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. She didn't know how to thank him properly. All she could do was bow her head and say, "I won't let you down." As she walked out of the hall that night, the city lights seemed brighter than ever. The air felt different, lighter, freer. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that restaurant weeks ago, tired and invisible. Something inside her had changed forever. She realized then that life could be unpredictable. One moment could turn everything around. What started as humiliation had become the door to her dreams. When she reached home, she sat by her small window again, just like before. But this time she didn't feel small. She felt alive. The future was uncertain, but for the first time it didn't scare her. She had music again. And that was enough. The morning after the charity event felt unreal. The waitress woke up to dozens of messages on her phone. Friends, coworkers, and even strangers had been sending her screenshots and links. Her performance had gone viral again, this time far beyond the restaurant video. Clips from the charity night were everywhere. News channels, social media, and even music blogs. People were calling her the piano girl with the golden heart. She sat on her small bed, holding her phone in disbelief. Every message she read filled her with joy and fear at the same time. Some people wrote that her music had made them cry. Others said her story inspired them to chase their own dreams. She didn't know how to respond to any of it. She wasn't used to attention. For so long, she had blended quietly into the background, serving food to people who never remembered her face. And now suddenly the whole world seemed to know her. When she arrived at work that day, the restaurant felt different. The staff clapped and cheered when she walked in. Even the manager, who usually only cared about rules and schedules, greeted her with a smile. "You've made us proud," he said. "You've put this place on the map." Customers who had never spoken to her before started asking for her autograph or a picture. She didn't know how to handle it, but she stayed humble and polite, just as she always had been. Still inside, she felt a strange mix of happiness and pressure. The attention was exciting, but also heavy, like a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. She received calls from reporters who wanted to interview her. Local TV stations invited her to perform. A few music schools offered her scholarships. The billionaire kept his word and arranged for her to meet with professionals who could guide her. It felt like a door had opened to a world she had only dreamed of. But with that new world came challenges she had never imagined. Her days became a blur of rehearsals, meetings, and interviews. People began to expect things from her. New performances, new songs, perfect appearances. Some wanted to shape her into someone else. More polished, more glamorous, more marketable. One day, during a meeting with a music promoter, she sat quietly while people discussed her as if she wasn't there. They talked about her look, her voice, what kind of songs she should play. One of them said, "She's talented, but we need to give her an image that sells." Another added, "Maybe we can make her perform pop songs. Classical music doesn't reach enough people." She sat there feeling smaller with every word. Music had always been her way of expressing truth, not a product to be packaged and sold. She didn't want to become something fake. When the meeting ended, she thanked them politely and left, but her heart was heavy. That night, she went back to the restaurant. It was late, almost closing time. The piano still sat in the corner, waiting. She pulled off the velvet cover and sat down, touching the keys gently. The moment her fingers touched them, the noise of the outside world disappeared. She played softly, letting her thoughts flow through the music. The melody was slower now, full of emotion. It reminded her of where she had come from, of long nights working hard, of her father's gentle voice, of the dream that had started quietly inside her heart. She realized she didn't want to lose that part of herself. Fame was wonderful, but it wasn't what she was truly after. The next morning, she met with the billionaire again. He could tell she looked tired. "Too many interviews?" he asked lightly. She nodded. "It's all happening so fast," she said. "I'm grateful, but I don't want to lose who I am in all this." He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "That's a good fear to have," he said. "It means you know what matters. Most people lose themselves chasing success. Don't let that happen to you," she smiled faintly. "I just want to make music that means something," she said. "Then do that," he replied. "Forget what they want to sell. Play what your heart tells you." Those words gave her strength. She began turning down offers that didn't feel right. She chose smaller performances where she could truly connect with people. She played at hospitals, schools, and charity homes, places where her music could bring comfort. The audiences were smaller, but the emotions were bigger. Each time she played, she saw smiles, tears, and quiet peace on people's faces. That meant more to her than any fame. But fame doesn't fade quietly. The more she focused on staying true to herself, the more others tried to pull her in different directions. Some called her foolish for refusing big contracts. Others said she was wasting her opportunity. The online world that once praised her began to split. Some admired her honesty, while others mocked her for being too simple. At first, their words hurt. She'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake. Maybe she should have taken the glamorous path. Maybe she was being too stubborn. But every time she doubted herself, she remembered that night in the restaurant, the laughter, the pressure, and the way music had saved her. That memory reminded her that she didn't need approval from anyone to know her worth. One evening, as she was leaving the restaurant after visiting her old co-workers, she found a small group of people waiting outside. They were street musicians, young and full of energy, holding cheap instruments but smiling brightly. One of them recognized her and said shyly, "We watched your story online. You're the reason we started playing again. Would you listen to us?" She nodded and stood there, listening as they played a rough but heartfelt tune. The melody was imperfect but full of life. When they finished, she clapped with genuine joy. "That was beautiful," she said. "Never stop playing." One of them laughed nervously. "We don't have a place to play anymore. The cafe that used to let us perform closed down." Something in her heart stirred. She thought about all the small artists she had met, people who loved music but had no opportunities. That night, an idea began to form in her mind, one that could change more than just her own life. The next week, she met the billionaire again and told him about her idea. She wanted to create a small foundation, a place where young musicians could practice, perform, and learn without worrying about money or status. A place where talent and heart mattered more than fame. The billionaire listened quietly, then smiled. "That's a beautiful idea," he said. "I'll help you start it." It took months of planning, but eventually her dream became real. The small community music center opened its doors with free instruments, lessons, and a small stage for performances. Children, teenagers, and adults came from all over the city to play. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, music, and hope. She spent her days there teaching and mentoring others while continuing to perform occasionally. Her name was still known, but now it was attached to something meaningful. Reporters wrote stories about how she turned her fame into kindness. One afternoon, while cleaning up after a music class, she noticed a young boy sitting alone by the piano. His hands hovered over the keys, unsure. She sat beside him and asked softly, "Why aren't you playing?" He shrugged. "I'm scared I'll mess up." She smiled gently. "You know, I used to be scared too. But mistakes are part of music. Sometimes they even make it more beautiful." He looked at her with wide eyes. "Did you make mistakes too?" "All the time," she said, laughing softly. "But every time I played from my heart, people listened. That's what matters most." He smiled, then pressed a few keys. The notes were shaky but honest. She joined in, turning his unsure melody into something lovely. They played together until the room was filled with warmth. When she went home that night, she thought about how far she had come. She had once been a tired waitress dreaming of a piano she couldn't touch. Now she was helping others find their voices through music. Her life wasn't perfect. It was real. There were still struggles, doubts, and long days. But there was also peace, and that was enough. As she looked out of her window at the city lights, she smiled softly. She had learned that success wasn't about fame or money. It was about what you do with the gifts you're given, and how you use them to bring light to others. And in that quiet moment, she realized something simple but powerful. Her story wasn't about being discovered. It was about rediscovering herself. Months passed quietly after the opening of the music center. The place had grown beyond what anyone expected. Every evening, laughter and music filled the air. Children practiced simple tunes while older students composed their own melodies. The walls, once bare, were now covered with photos, drawings, and handwritten notes from people whose lives had been touched by music. The waitress, now known for much more than her job title, spent most of her days surrounded by sounds that brought her peace. Her life had slowed down in the best possible way. There were no flashing cameras or bright stages, just honest human moments. She loved sitting by the piano in the corner of the room, listening as others played. Sometimes she joined them, her fingers moving gently across the keys, blending into their melodies instead of leading them. Despite the joy the center brought, she still felt a quiet ache inside. It wasn't sadness, it was more like a soft reminder of where she had come from. Every now and then, she thought about the restaurant, the long shifts, and the people who had unknowingly shaped her journey. She wondered if they ever thought of her too. One afternoon, while she was cleaning the piano keys, an older man walked into the music center. His face was kind but worn, and he carried a small package wrapped neatly in brown paper. He introduced himself as a retired teacher who had once taught music in schools but had lost touch with it after his wife's passing. "I saw the story about this place in the newspaper," he said quietly. "I thought maybe I could help, even if just a little." He placed the package on the piano. Inside was an old music book, its pages yellowed with time. On the first page was a handwritten note, "For anyone who believes that music can heal." Her eyes softened as she read it. She thanked him and promised to keep it safe. Over the next few weeks, he began visiting often, helping children tune their instruments and teaching them small lessons about rhythm and patience. He became part of the little family that had formed inside the center's walls. As the months turned into a year, the foundation grew. People from across the city donated instruments, volunteered time, and came to watch the students perform. It wasn't just a music center anymore, it was a place of hope. And though her name still appeared in headlines sometimes, she never let it change her. She stayed the same calm, humble person she had always been. One day, she received a letter from a familiar source, the billionaire who had first given her a chance. He wrote that he was planning another charity event, this time even larger than before, and he wanted her students to perform. "It's time to show the world what you've built," the letter said. The invitation brought back a flood of memories. The first event had changed everything for her. It had been the start of her new life. But now it wasn't just her story anymore. It was about all the young musicians who had found courage through her example. When she told her students about the event, they were both thrilled and nervous. Many of them had never performed for such a large audience before. She smiled reassuringly. "Don't think about the crowd," she told them. "Just play from your hearts. That's all that matters." The weeks leading up to the event were filled with rehearsals. The students practiced until their fingers ached, but the sound of their laughter filled the air between every session. She guided them gently, reminding them that mistakes were not failures but part of learning. On the night of the performance, the hall shimmered with light. The billionaire, dressed in a simple suit this time, greeted her warmly. "I'm proud of you," he said sincerely. "You've turned something small into something beautiful." She smiled humbly. "I just wanted to give others the chance I was given," she said. When the show began, the young musicians walked on stage with shaking hands but determined hearts. The first few notes were uncertain, but soon the music filled the hall with warmth. Parents, teachers, and strangers listened, some with tears in their eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It carried love, effort, and truth. As she watched them play from behind the curtain, she felt a lump form in her throat. She saw herself in each of those children, the fear, the hope, the spark that refuses to fade even when the world tries to silence it. After the performance ended, the audience gave a standing ovation. The billionaire took the stage, smiling at the young musicians. "These children remind us of something we often forget," he said. "That true art comes not from fame or money, but from honesty." He then gestured for her to come up. The spotlight found her, and she hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. The crowd erupted in applause, but she waved gently for them to quiet down. "I don't have much to say," she began softly. "A few years ago, I was just a waitress who loved music. I never imagined standing here tonight, but life has a strange way of bringing us where we're meant to be. If I've learned anything, it's that dreams don't fade just because they take time. They wait for us to be ready." Her words hung in the air, quiet but powerful. Then she turned to the piano and sat down. "This last piece," she said, "isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who ever believed in something when no one else did." The hall went silent. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The music started softly, almost like a whisper, then grew into something rich and full. It carried the story of her journey, the struggle, the loneliness, the kindness that changed everything, and the joy of giving back. The melody rose and fell like a heartbeat, echoing through every corner of the hall.